Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, or welcome to if this is your first time tuning in. Today we're addressing what might be one of the Walt Disney Company's most controversial attractions to date, and that is Walt Disney A Magical Life, featuring Imagineering's first ever Walt Disney Animatronic. Now, if you've already read reviews or watched videos of this new show, do hang with me anyway, because we're doing something a little different. While I am going to analyze the show and give my take on the good and the bad, I'm also going to react to what a former Imagineer had to say about Walt Disney A Magical Life, and talk about whether this show is here to stay. So you are watching Probably a Disney, and today's video is all about Disneyland's Walt Disney A Magical Life and what is being said about it. To begin, there are a few things you should know about this attraction. First of all, it debuts to the public on July 17th, Disneyland's 70th anniversary, and probably already has by the time you're watching this. The Opera House's previous tenant, Great Moments Mr. Lincoln, is not going away, but will rather be offered in rotation with Walt Disney A Magical Life down the road. The show is 17 minutes long, but it is important to note that that's not just the Walt animatronic. The show actually begins with an adaptation of the One Man's Dream film narrated by Walt Disney, and that tells the story of his life and is about 15 minutes long in and of itself. This is then followed by an introduction from Disney CEO Bob Iger, and only then does the curtain lift for Walt. In deciding on Walt's age and his appearance for the show, Disney creatives chose the year 1963. His wardrobe, including his shoes, tie, and rings, are intended to be accurate and detailed as possible, and the office you see in the backdrop is his actual office in Burbank. Disney used several historical sources, and they combined them for Walt's speech and for the sound of his voice. And Imagineering pushed the envelope with this animatronic in several ways, from realistic skin, thanks to a new method. There was also a major focus on muscle structure, the nuances of vocalization, his mannerisms, and even how he rubs his hands and how he blinks. Also, this Walt animatronic features a new bend to rise movement, a new achievement in an electric figure, and they attempted to create the twinkle in Walt's eye with what's called a corneal bulge in the animatronic's eye. Finally, the animatronic figure and the show has been 7 years in the making, but reportedly Imagineering has been thinking about something like this for decades. So that's a lot of info there, which is understandable given this project's significance, but the real question now is, does it work, and is it resonating with guests? And the answer varies depending who you ask, because the online discourse and reactions have been divisive, to say the least. As for me, I've been back and forth on this project since it was announced. In some ways, I love the idea, but in other ways, it seemed a little concerning. But now that I've seen it, I'm going to give my analysis, my opinion on both the good and not so good, and then we'll dive into what a former Imagineer thought. So here is what I liked about Walt Disney A Magical Life, beginning with the significance. The poetry that Walt Disney, the man who pioneered animatronics, is now sharing the same theater as his Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln and representation of his own real-life hero, as well as the fact that his apartment on Main Street faces the Opera House, it's not lost on me. Neither is the fact that his warmth, his brand of personality, and his own words are active in his park and in a way that more guests are going to see and hear than probably ever before. I was also impressed with the animatronic's movements and mannerisms. For me, his body language and those subtle movements really help sell the illusion more than anything else. And the moment at the end where he leans against the desk, very impressive and truly lifelike. I also appreciated the setting being his office and the personal nature of being invited into his space. There is something, however, I wish they would have done better with his office, which I'll get to in a minute with my critiques, but overall, the concept I love. Finally, I was glad they brought some magic in at the end with his famous quote, "It was all started by a mouse," complete with pixie dust effects overhead and "When you wish upon a star" from Pinocchio. That made it feel magical, but also a little bit vintage as well. Now, as for what I didn't like, well, this won't be a surprise because it is the thing everyone's talking about, and that's the Walt Animatronic's face. It is simply not a good likeness of Walt Disney. And I've heard the arguments, the theories for why that is, such as like the tech, the advancements they're trying to achieve wouldn't work with the structure of his face, and that most guests will never notice. It was even noted in Disney's press release about the figure that they wanted it to feel like Walt rather than just look like Walt. But in my opinion, the one thing they needed to get right and prioritize more so than his mannerisms or that twinkle in his eye was his likeness. And I can't honestly say I prefer a figure that feels like Walt over one that looks like him. I also think this is noticeable enough to be a distraction from the show and possibly hinder it from becoming that home run that Disney was going for. Technological advancements may impress guests for the moment, but it's the details that they connect with. I also felt the show should have been just a little bit longer. Granted, I get why it was short because of the tech involved, but I felt like 3 stories or anecdotes from Walt would have felt more complete than just 2. I also wish we could have got a few more of his famous lines in there. Well, the story about his brother, the mailman, was charming. I feel like other Walt stories and quotes say more about who he was than that one. And while I'm glad they used the actual audio of Walt, something just sounds off. And I think that's a big deal, even though I understand it varies where you sit in the theater. Furthermore, I also wish more of a focus had been on the office that we're seeing. Well, I like the office, like I mentioned. It's important to note that Walt had 2 offices. One was formal, and the other, the one in this show, was his real working office, where he spent most of his time. And I think knowing that, or an emphasis on that, would have added to the intimacy of the experience. And I can't help but wish that the finale, where the magic reveals Mickey Mouse overhead, could have been accomplished by Tinkerbell, just like in the wonderful world of Disney. Overall, yes, I would take time to see the show. But if I really want to get the real essence of Walt, his vision, his contributions, I still would turn on old clips from the Wonderful World of Disney, our Wonderful World of Color on YouTube, which, by the way, should be on Disney Plus if acquainting guests with the man is truly a priority for the company. And while I respect the hours and the artistry that went into this project, I do have to ask, if it wasn't able to be accomplished seamlessly, did we need it in all those years of work? But now let's get to who you really want to hear from about Walt Disney: A Magical Life, and that is former Imagineer Eddie Sotto, who, in case you don't know, he spent 13 years at Imagineering and was the senior of concept design in the early 1990s. He helped design Disneyland Paris's Main Street USA, Disneyland's Indiana Jones Adventure, Tokyo Disneyland's Pooh Honey Hunt, which was the first trackless dark ride, as well as Mission Space, the Disneyland Paris Hotel, and his voice can be heard in parks all around the world, such as Shrunken Ned at Disneyland, and at one time, I need to check if this is still the case, the boarding call for the Walt Disney World Railroad. Now, Eddie Sotto retired from Disney years ago, but if you're tapped into the Disney Park social media discourse, you have likely seen his stuff. He got a lot of attention recently for providing a solution to the Rivers of America removal. And I personally really appreciate an Imagineer, a designer, who doesn't just create but is capable of articulating the psychology of design and engineering, and who's able to bring to light all those subconscious reasons behind why we respond to things the way that we do, and then also why at times we don't. Eddie Sotto does this brilliantly while still being a Disney fan, and you should definitely follow him on social media if you don't already. But when I came across his thoughts, his review, and his reaction to Walt Disney A Magical Life, I thought his words were really illuminating and definitely worth discussing. So on X, Sotto described the Walt animatronic and its show as a tall order, saying, "As humans, we have an innate sense of what is real to us. Beyond physical comparison, so many subtle cues make up our likeness. A bit of gravel in our voice, a pregnant pause, a glance. I wonder if it's even possible for an AA to emulate the charisma, passion, and inner child in the eyes that actually come together to form the true likeness of Walt Disney we connected with on TV. Sculptor Blaine Gibson, who did the Partners version, used to ever so slightly exaggerate features, as that's how we recall someone in our memory. They read as that person versus slaving to a life mask. Lincoln's lighting also did that." He further noted that audio for the show seems heavily pitch controlled and texture scrubbed. And while he has not seen the show in person, this was his impression based on what Disney released. Now, there are several things I found really interesting here. First of all, he addresses the almost unexplainable and potentially impossible ways we as people perceive what is real or reality. And I think the fact that he questioned the premise of the project and if it's even possible to be accomplished is something that's missing for some of the criticisms in online discourse. We need to acknowledge how hard this project was, both when we praise it and when we critique it and even question it. I also found it so interesting that Blaine Gibson, the legendary sculptor responsible for the Hall of Presidents and the Partner statues, that he exaggerated a person's features because that's how our memories work. Not only maybe this should have been the approach for this project if it wasn't already, but it raises the question of whether when Disney is creating something lifelike, if they should avoid aiming for replication or a carbon copy, but instead focus on how the mind works and achieving to what the public will deem as an accurate likeness. He also mentioned lighting and how important that is, as well as those audio issues I mentioned. And in a separate post sometime later, he shared, "In the company release videos, he seems to be lit rather flat. Lighting plays a big part in creating your impression of how face is shaped. I'm withholding final judgment until I see it in person." Quick update, Eddie Sotto just posted another review after I finished recording this, and based on him watching the show twice. So this is what he had to say now. "Saw the show twice, sat closer and farther. Overall, it's very good, exhibits nice, film great, I enjoyed it in total. The face needs to be fixed, audio a bit processed. Animation well done, but more than anything, I thought his speech content, considering all the great things he said, fun to do the impossible, etc., could have been more inspiring, leading to a stronger ending. I was always conscious it was an AA. That said, both audience loved it, the film is a great lead-in, and the figure is just a part of that bigger story." So that is the final review from Eddie Sotto, and it's pretty consistent with his initial critiques. Overall, I felt like Sotto was respectful and classy with his comments while still being honest, and some of his critiques reflect those of fans online, suggesting that there are definitely some issues here, and ones that an Imagineer and designer easily recognized as well. But here's what I want to know. What is your opinion of Walt Disney A Magical Life? Do you think Walt's face, the lighting, and the audio missed the mark? Or do you have a completely different take? And is this something Disney needed? And could it have even been fully achieved? But before I let you go, Disney's press release for Walt Disney A Magical Life addressed the show's timeline, describing it as a permanent tribute. So the show for now is here to stay. It's intended to be a permanent part of Disneyland. And that actually casts doubts on my thoughts that it eventually might come to Disney World, unless of course they built multiple AAs like this one. Maybe we'll find out for sure at D23. But for now, there you have it. That is my take on Walt Disney A Magical Life, as well as what a former Imagineer had to say about this new Disneyland show. But again, do let me know your opinions in the comments. But remember to be kind, however, this is a Walt Disney focused discussion after all. And I would so appreciate if you would hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel, especially if Disney park news, updates, and analysis is also your thing. But regardless, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I hope you have a magical day.